Hello, Laverne here, and I'd like to thank you for stopping by and taking a few minutes to examine a non-canonical prophecy that speaks to how the church would become infected with falsehoods. But before looking at the prophecy itself, I'd like to begin by saying I feel growing optimism with the number of Christians that I see denouncing long-standing church traditions and centuries-old heretical doctrine. What was just a trickle of people denouncing traditional Christianity 2 or 3 decades ago has grown into a river with many tributaries. As a result, fewer Christians are dying the second death now due to a lack of knowledge. And one of the reasons for this is because a greater number of people are exploring non-canonical writings that are not part of mainstream Christian canons. Now, one such writing is titled The Coptic Apocalypse of Peter, which points to Saul of Tarsus, aka Apostle Paul, as being a false apostle that was sent to test believers. So have a listen to what the Christ told Peter in a vision, and I'll catch you on the other side to discuss the spirit of Hermas that the Christ warns would deceive multitudes of people.
They have been given freedom that they may create an imitation remnant in the name of a dead man, who is Hermas, of the firstborn of unrighteousness. This kindred race of the sisterhood will appear as an imitation. These are the ones who oppress their brothers, saying to them, "Through this our God has pity, since salvation comes to us through this." And there shall be others of those who are outside our number who name themselves bishop and also deacons, as if they have received their authority from God. They bend themselves under the judgment of the leaders. Those people are dry canals. And they will cleave to the name of a dead man, thinking that they will become pure. But they will become greatly defiled, and they will fall into a name of error, and into the hand of an evil, cunning man, and a manifold dogma. And they will be ruled without law.
Well, that was quite the prophetic warning coming from the mouth of the Christ himself. And once we examine 3 specific points in the prophecy, it then becomes abundantly clear that the real reason this book was kept out of the canon is because it is a clear warning that Paul is the person being described as a lying false teacher. Now, the first and possibly most significant of the 3 points is that we are given the name Hermas, which is a variation of the name of the Greek god Hermes. So the Christ is warning us that a man having the spirit of Hermes would deceive multitudes of people. This is important because in the book of Acts, we are told that the Pharisee, known as Paul the Apostle, was believed to have been the Greek god Hermes by the people living in the town of Lystra. In fact, a pagan priest and residents of the town tried to worship Paul and Barnabas by offering sacrifices to them. Having explained this, let's now compare what the Greek god Hermes was known for to what Paul was also known for. Hermes was known for a number of things, but chief among them was that he was the messenger of gods and herald who delivered messages to both gods and humans. So he could, in fact, be thought of as being an apostle of gods, since the meaning of apostle is sent one. Research the etymology, the history, and the original meaning of the word apostle, and you'll find the word comes from the Greek apostolos, meaning one who is sent off, or messenger. It signifies a delegate or envoy with a special mission, carrying more weight than a simple messenger. Since Paul claimed to have been chosen to be an apostle or messenger to the Gentiles, we can see that he had this trait in common with Hermes. Paul even specifically called himself a herald, which is what Hermes was also called. Hermes was the patron of travelers, merchants, thieves, athletes, shepherds, and orators. He was the god of language and writings and of flocks, or animal husbandry. Now consider that Paul is the patron saint of missionaries, evangelists, writers, authors, journalists, publishers, theologians, converts, rope and saddle makers, and public workers. And Paul instructed the Ephesian elders to be shepherds of the church of God and to oversee the entire flock. Hermes was known as a trickster and deceiver, and Paul admitted in both 1st and 2nd Corinthians that he used deceptive tactics, guile, and deceit to make converts. Well, the Christ warns us that the Pharisees would travel great distances to make a single convert and then turn that person into twice the child of hell that they were. And this brings me to my next point. Hermes was also the god who led souls to the underworld. And a good argument can be made that Paul's false gospel of easy believism leads people down the wide and easy path that the Christ said leads to destruction. Or another way to put it, leads to hell. Now I'd like to share a point that even if some of you had already made a connection between Saul of Tarsus and Hermes, I'm fairly confident no one has thought of a connection between the city of Tarsus, where Saul was from, and Hermes. I bring this up because if you search the meaning of Tarsus and where its name comes from, you'll find there are several hypotheses, with one of them being that the meaning is tied to winged or feathered. And Hermes was believed to have wings on his ankles, helmet, and the staff that he carried called a caduceus. So, with Saul coming from a city that identifies with wings, it is just one more connection with Hermes. Though certainly the fact that both of them are considered to be messengers and tricksters are two of the most compelling characteristics. And I'd like to add that the residents of Lystra in the book of Acts, calling him Hermes, was no mistake, for they correctly identified the true spirit that was guiding him. And the church has been given this information so that those with eyes to see could make the connection with the prophecy that we find in the Coptic apocalypse of Peter. Now I know that the die-hard Paulinists will never agree to the view I've shared here about Hermes and will instead defend church tradition and will side with the masses. So, if you are among the minority that have had their eyes open, leave a comment so that others can know that they are not alone. All right then, that's about all I have to say regarding Saul's connection to the spirit of Hermes. Now the second point of the prophecy to examine is the phrase manifold dogma that we are told the false teacher would preach. Because any honest theologian, pastor, preacher, elder, or teacher of the gospel will have to admit that the dozens of incompatible doctrine and theologies that are taught in roughly 40,000 Christian denominations stem from Saul's writings. And this is due to him changing instructions and creating entirely new theologies that were never taught in the Old Testament writings or in the four Gospels or in the epistles of the apostles who actually walked with and were instructed by the Christ. He sometimes teaches salvation is by faith alone apart from works, and then other times teaches obedience and obeying the law is required. Was the law done away with and nailed to the cross? Was the law given only for a short time, or is it still in effect and only believers who keep the law will be saved? Saul stated he would rather people, both male and female, remain single as he is, and that they should remain in whatever state they were in when they came to the Christ. But then he also states widows under the age of 60 should not receive assistance and instead should be forced to remarry so that the husband can care for the widow and her children. He claimed no harm comes to someone if they eat food sacrificed to idols, but this then flies in the face of being obedient and keeping the law. Many Christian dispensationalists claim the gospel of the Christ and the 12 apostles was for the Jews, while Saul's gospel was for the Gentiles. And these are just a few examples of Saul contradicting himself, which is why and how it is that the Christ said the cunning man, referred to as Hermes, would teach a manifold dogma. The third point to discuss is the terms imitation remnant and imitation sisterhood, as this is clearly warning the elect that a imitation or a counterfeit church along with a counterfeit Christ would be created that would oppose the true bride of the Christ, for this is why the term sisterhood is used, as it depicts a counterfeit bride. This, of course, lines up with the warning in the Bible that wolves dressed as sheep would make their way into the fold, and this is backed up in a warning in the non-canonical writing titled the Didache, also known as the Teaching of the 12 Apostles, that warns us some sheep would enter the church, would become believers, and then would turn into wolves. So let that sink in. Some sheep would turn into wolves, which means some people who are embraced and accepted into the church would turn into wolves. These warnings are extremely important because when you combine the prophecies about the church that are found in both canonical and non-canonical writings, you will find there are far more warnings about heresy, corruption, persecution, and violence coming from within the church itself than what there is from outside of it. Now for the final piece of the puzzle that identifies Paul as the person being described in the Coptic Apocalypse of Peter, I'd like to finish with a prophecy from another non-canonical writing titled Clementines' Homilies, which tells us when this wicked man would first come on the scene and begin creating this counterfeit sisterhood. Because the counterfeit does not come after the spread of the true gospel, but rather precedes it, and is actually created prior to the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem that occurred in 70 AD. And when you combine the prophecy from these two non-canonical writings with prophecies found in the Bible, it leaves little doubt that Paul was a false apostle who served the purpose of testing the elect. So have a listen to what Peter has to say, and then drop a comment and a like if you would like to see more videos like these that expose heretical doctrine and traditions that are being taught and practiced in churches today.
As the true prophet has told us, a false prophet must first come from some deceiver, and then, in like manner, after the removal of the holy place, the true gospel must be secretly sent abroad for the rectification of the heresies that shall be. After this also, towards the end, Antichrist must first come, and then our Jesus must be revealed to be indeed the Christ.